Today, we're diving into a powerful, almost invisible force that shapes our entire global economy. It's something that influences huge trade deals, but also, believe it or not, your own personal savings habits. This isn't just a theory. It's based on a massive review of business research, and it's been hiding in plain sight this whole time. So let's get right into it.
So let me ask you this. When you think about the biggest hurdles in global business, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it tariffs? Complex logistics? Maybe even those big cultural differences? And yeah, those are all massive for sure. But what if the biggest barrier of all is something we use every single day? Something so fundamental we barely even notice it.
Well, it turns out that a huge body of research points to one answer that is way more fundamental than all the others, and that answer's language. But its impact, as we're about to see, goes so much deeper than just simple communication.
And that brings us to our first big idea here. We've got to stop thinking about language as just a tool, something we use to talk or write. We need to start seeing it for what it really is, a fundamental force that can drive, direct, and sometimes completely derail international business.
This quote from the researchers really just nails it. They say that language permeates every facet of international business. It's not just part of the game, it's the environment the game is played in. It's like the water that global business swims in. It touches absolutely everything, from the highest level strategy all the way down to how a team on the ground gets along.
And, this isn't just some vague, fuzzy concept. Researchers can actually measure this barrier using something they call linguistic distance. Basically, it's a way to quantify how different two languages are from each other, in their grammar, their vocabulary, their whole structure. And the bigger that distance, the higher the invisible wall between two countries or two companies. So just how big of a deal is this invisible wall? Well, the economic impact is absolutely staggering. Get this, a massive analysis found that when two countries share a common language, trade between them jumps by an incredible 44%. That's not a small difference. That is a gigantic economic driver, and it's almost entirely down to language. Now, what's really wild is how long a factor this massive was pretty much ignored. For decades, business schools, researchers, they paid it almost no attention at all. But as you're about to see, that changed in a very big way.
Just look at this timeline. As recently as 1987, a major review of nearly 500 management textbooks found that language was, it was basically a ghost. It wasn't there. And all through the 90s, it was still just a tiny niche topic. It really wasn't until the very end of the decade that the field started to wake up to what was going on.
And this chart shows you exactly what happened next. Boom, the field just exploded. We go from only 14 articles in more than a decade to hundreds. Scholars finally started giving this the attention it deserved, because they realized you just can't understand the global economy if you don't understand its languages. Okay, so the researchers finally woke up. What did all this new work actually find? Well, the impact of language is pretty complex. So to make sense of it all, they broke it down into 4 different levels, from the single individual all the way up to the entire country.
This table gives us a great bird's eye view. At the individual level, your language skills can literally make or break your career. At the group level, language decides who's in the circle and who's out. For a whole company, it can determine if a merger succeeds or fails. And then, at the country level, that's where things get truly mind-bending. So let's start with you, the individual. Imagine you're a non-native speaker in a big multinational company. Using that second language all day, every day, it creates a real mental strain, a lot of anxiety. On the flip side, if you're bilingual, you can become this super valuable boundary spanner, connecting different parts of the organization. But the research also shows a darker side. Having an accent can, unfortunately, lead to very real discrimination in hiring.
Now zoom out to a team setting. All those individual experiences start to create these powerful group dynamics. Picture this, a few people on your team switch to their native language, even for just a minute. For everyone else in the room, it can feel like being shut out, a feeling researchers have a name for, linguistic ostracism. And just like that, you have an in-group and an out-group, and trust starts to break down.
Okay, but the effects of language go so much deeper than just communication. This is where we get into a fascinating idea called linguistic relativity. The theory is that the actual grammar and structure of your native language can shape how you perceive the world, and even how you think. And this right here is linguistic relativity in action. It's wild.
So some languages, like German, have what's called a weak future time reference. You might say something like, tomorrow it rains, which sounds a lot like today it rains. But in English, we have a strong reference. We have to say, tomorrow it will rain, which grammatically separates the future. And here's the incredible part. Speakers of those languages where the future feels linguistically closer to the present consistently save more money, they smoke less, and they have lower rates of obesity. Their grammar is subtly nudging them toward more future-oriented behavior.
And it doesn't stop there. Here's another powerful example. Researchers found that in countries where the language uses gendered nouns and pronouns, he or she for objects, there is consistently lower female representation on corporate boards. It seems that the language itself reflects and maybe even reinforces societal norms about gender roles, and you can see the results in the boardroom.
We are really just scratching the surface of all these effects. This whole field of research is just taking off. But to really understand this hidden force, scholars know they need a clear roadmap for what comes next.
And that roadmap looks a lot like this. First, they've got to break down the walls between different academic fields. Business scholars need to team up with linguists, psychologists, even neuroscientists. Second, they need to connect the dots between all those levels we talked about. How does one person's anxiety about their accent create a power struggle on their team? And third, they need to use new and better methods, everything from lab experiments to boots-on-the-ground ethnography to get a much clearer, richer picture of what's happening.
Okay, so we've seen how language can shape business from a single person all the way up to a whole country. But let's zoom out and ask the big question. So what? Why does any of this actually matter to us?
It matters because language isn't just another app running on your computer. It's the entire operating system. It's the underlying code that is quietly structuring our interactions, our decisions, our teams, and our economies. And if you don't understand the code, you're never going to fully understand the outcome. So, if you're going to take away just a few things, here they are. First, for any global business, language isn't just talk. It's a huge strategic asset, and it's also a major risk that has to be managed. Second, the very language you grew up speaking might be influencing your choices about money and health in ways you've never even thought about. And finally, if you work in any kind of global role, understanding these effects isn't just a nice to have, it is absolutely crucial for your success. Which really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We know the global economy speaks in many, many languages. It's this complex symphony of different voices and grammars and worldviews. The real question is, are we paying close enough attention? Are we truly fluent enough, not just to speak, but to actually listen to what all those languages are trying to tell us?